Would you believe it if I told you that a dog bit a kidnapper's arm at the very moment when all seemed lost, and that it completely changed the ending of the story? Stories like this look like movie scripts, but real life is sometimes even more surprising. And it is precisely on this boundary, between the improbable and the unbelievable, that dogs turn out to be true heroes. The question remains, what makes an animal risk everything without thinking about itself to save someone? Imagine the scene. The fear stamped on the faces of the victims, the tension in the air, the feeling that there is no way out. And then, out of nowhere, comes that unexpected force, a protective instinct so powerful that it changes everything in a matter of seconds. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever witnessed an animal react in a way that seemed impossible? If not, stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you. Dogs have always been recognized as loyal companions, attentive guardians, and even symbols of courage. But when we talk about extreme situations, such as a kidnapping or a fire, loyalty turns into something much greater: pure bravery. There is no training that teaches this kind of attitude. It is as if it is engraved in their heart. And when that instinct speaks louder, the impossible happens. Perhaps you have heard stories of dogs that ran into burning houses, that jumped in front of strangers to defend their owners, or that, with a simple bark, avoided tragedies. But there is something even more fascinating about these accounts: the impact they have not only on the victims, but on everyone who hears them afterwards. These narratives arouse hope, emotion, and even a certain faith in the unexpected. Now think with me. In a world where so many people hesitate in the face of danger, why doesn't a dog hesitate? What is it about this invisible bond between humans and dogs that makes them act so extraordinarily? This is what we are going to dive into today. And you will realize that these stories are not just trivia, but real-life lessons. Every detail of these moments carries something unique: the determined look of the animal, the instinct that guides every movement, the surprise on people's faces when they see that salvation has come from where they least expected it. It is as if dogs remind us that there is still courage in its purest, most selfless and genuine form. And this is not just an isolated act. What lies behind these stories is the deep connection we create with them, often without even realizing it. The dog is not thinking of being a hero, nor does it seek recognition. He simply feels, reacts, and acts, because for him, you are part of his pack. And protecting the pack is a mission that admits of no failures. What you will follow from now on is not only a story of courage, but also an invitation to reflect on the power of this bond, on how a simple gesture of an animal can transform an entire destiny. And get ready. The scene that you will relive in the next few minutes goes beyond imagination, because when all seemed lost, a dog decided to take action. And what happened next is something you have to see to believe. And as you follow this story, perhaps you have felt that shiver or remembered some moment when an animal surprised you with a gesture of protection, affection, or courage. These memories have incredible power because they show how the connection between humans and dogs surpasses any logical explanation. And that's exactly why I want to invite you to participate in this conversation in a very simple way. Share in the comments your experience, your opinion, or even what you felt so far. If this makes sense to you, go on the record. Because when you comment, we create a community together that values and celebrates stories that truly touch the heart. And since we are building this exchange, also take the opportunity to leave your like. It may seem like just one click, but it shows that this content has value and deserves to continue reaching more people. Each like is like a sign that this message matters and that it should not get lost in the middle of so many other videos. And of course, if you feel that this is the kind of story you want to follow more often, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next reports and continue to be part of this journey with us. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people who also need to hear messages like this. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about telling stories of courage, but about creating a place where everyone can be inspired, moved, and even feel a little more empowered. So comment, like, and subscribe, and follow me, because what comes now will still surprise you. It was an ordinary afternoon in a small town in the United States, the kind of afternoon when time seems to go slower and everything conveys the feeling of security. The streets, lined with trees that for decades had witnessed the life of that place, were silent, illuminated by a soft light that broke through the canopies. The light wind made some dry leaves roll across the asphalt, while in the background, one could hear the distant sound of children playing. It was an environment that seemed perfect in its simplicity, as if nothing could break that peaceful atmosphere. A family headed home after a walk. The father carried a couple of bags with fruits and groceries. The mother balanced her steps while holding the younger daughter's hand, and the son, a little older, walked ahead, distracted by something on his mobile phone. The family dog came right behind, attentive, sniffing the ground here and there as if on its own parallel adventure. Everything seemed so normal that it would be impossible to predict what was about to happen, but life has this power to flip the script in a matter of seconds, as if to remind us that we are not always in control of our journey. The sound of an engine interrupted the lull. A black car suddenly appeared on the curve. At first, nothing strange. Cars drove by every day. But the abrupt way in which he slowed down and stopped just ahead broke the illusion of tranquility. In a quick movement, the doors opened and two men came down. Their steps were firm, their gaze carried hardness, and the energy they emanated contrasted violently with the peaceful scenery. It was as if in an instant the entire city had changed its atmosphere. The mother's heart quickened. Instinct spoke louder. She pulled her children close as if she wanted to create a human barrier between them and strangers. The father, without time to think, positioned himself in front, trying to be firm, but the mind was already struggling with fear. The feeling was of being in front of a dark script that had escaped from the pages of a book or behind the scenes of a movie. The silence of the street was swallowed by an almost palpable tension, an invisible weight that made each breath seem shorter, harder. And it is in this kind of situation that time seems to distort. Seconds gain the density of minutes, and every detail is etched in memory with frightening accuracy. The sound of the gate knocking in the distance, the metallic smell in the air, the menacing look of those who approach. The brain looks for ways out, alternatives, but reality insists on remembering that there is no time, that everything is happening now. And it was exactly at that moment, when fear seemed to occupy all spaces, that something extraordinary revealed itself. The family dog, until then silent, picked up every signal. Her eyes fixed on the men, her ears lifted, her body tensed. There was no doubt, there was no hesitation. In a split second, he shot off. The sound of paws against the ground broke the silence, echoing like an announcement that the situation was about to change. The attack was accurate. He lunged at the nearest man and dug his teeth into his arm. The cry of surprise that escaped the attacker broke the control he believed he had. The impact was so unexpected that the roles were reversed in the blink of an eye. The power of the scene changed owners. What was once an absolute threat has become an exposed vulnerability. The other man, stunned, tried to react, but there was no longer the same confidence in his movements. And in that brief interval of chaos, the family gained something that seemed impossible seconds before. A chance. But this is not just a physical attack. What happened there goes beyond the instinct of defense. This scene is the materialization of a silent loyalty, of an invisible pact that dogs and humans have carried for centuries. There is something almost spiritual about this bond, something that cannot be explained by biology or animal behavior alone. It's as if, the moment the family's life was put at risk, an ancestral force had awakened inside that dog. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because we are not just talking about an impulsive reaction, we are talking about psychological impact, emotional transformation, a complete change of mentality in the face of danger. For the family, seconds before, the denouement seemed inevitable, a tragic ending written in front of them. But suddenly, the narrative broke. The unexpected came into play and created a new possibility. This transition from absolute fear to unexpected hope is so striking that it can forever change the way those people view life. And it's not just for those who lived. When we hear this story, when we see this scene, we are also affected. We feel our hearts racing, our breath heavy, our minds wondering how we would react if we were in their shoes. It's as if this narrative is a mirror of our own hidden truths, our fears, our choices, our decisions that can redefine an entire journey. A dog facing danger not only saves lives, but also teaches us that courage can manifest itself in the most unlikely places. And that lesson echoes. It forces us to reflect on our own mentality. How often do we freeze in the face of lesser threats? How often do we hesitate to stand up for what matters? The attitude of an animal, pure in its essence, reveals how much we humans complicate what should be simple. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is action in spite of it. And this is the kind of revelation that crosses time and marks not only those who were present, but everyone who listens to the story. The extraordinary can be born in banal moments. A quiet street, a sunny afternoon, a family walk. Everything can turn when unexpected forces come into play, and every detail of the scene proves this. The fixed gaze of the dog, the cry of surprise of the kidnapper, the desperate embrace of the mother and the children, the sigh of hope that broke through the terror. They are fragments that come together to form an unforgettable picture, a landmark that never fades. And that's why stories like this touch us so much. They are not just stories of courage, they are living reminders that life can change in seconds, that there is an invisible layer of protection, that true loyalty can be stronger than any weapon. Each time we revisit these narratives, we are invited to look within, to realize that we also carry forces that we may never have used. After all, if a dog is capable of challenging the impossible on behalf of his family, what are we humans willing to do when everything is at stake? This is a question that echoes and is not easily answered. But perhaps the answer lies not in the words, but in the gestures we make when the unexpected meets us. And since we are living this immersion together, I want to propose one simple thing. Right there in the comments. This makes sense to me. It is the way to record that this reflection has also touched you, that somehow this journey has already begun to transform you. The kidnapper's cry of pain still echoed through the street as the scene took on a new unfolding. That moment of imbalance, provoked by the unexpected courage of the dog, was not enough to stop the threat. On the contrary, it brought out the fury of those who do not accept losing control. It was at that moment that the worst was revealed. One of the men, previously restrained, pulled a gun from his waistband. The metallic glow in the afternoon light made the family's heart freeze. What was already fear turned into pure despair, into a suffocating silence, as if the world had stopped spinning. The man walked toward the family car, the gun steady in his hand, his gaze charged with violence. The next gesture was brutal. He tried to open the door with force, shouting words that mixed threat and lack of control. The scene seemed like a shadow cast from some nightmare, one of those that leave us breathless. With each knock on the door, the feeling of helplessness grew. It was as if all the security built over a lifetime had fallen apart in seconds, revealing the fragility that no one likes to face. The mother, inside the car with the children, felt her whole body tremble. The youngest son cried silently, clinging to her arm, not understanding exactly what was happening, but realizing in his mother's gaze that something terrible was about to happen. The daughter, a little older, stood motionless, her eyes wide as if frozen by fear. The father, standing outside, still tried to position himself in such a way as to protect, but he knew that in the face of a weapon, any wrong movement could be fatal. And it is at this point that we realize how paralyzing fear can be. It invades the mind, distorts time, turns seconds into eternities. It is an invisible weight that settles in the chest, robbing the ability to think clearly. The desperation of the family was a mixture of survival instinct with the cruel feeling of having no way out. The pointed gun, the aggressive scream, the threat to take one of the children. All this created an atmosphere that seemed definite, as if the denouement had already been written. But there is something that always escapes logic, the unpredictability of life. In the midst of maximum tension, small decisions, instincts, revelations can arise and completely change the course of history. And that is precisely where the transformation lives. The moment when the human being is put against the wall and has to choose between giving in to fear or finding strength in places he never imagined. This family was about to find out in a brutal way. The armed man knocked on the door, demanding that it be opened. Every blow made the car shudder. Every word tore the mother's mind even more, who could only think of protecting her children. The dog, still growling at the attacker's blood-stained muzzle, was in an attacking position, but now faced a different threat. He knew somehow that that object in the man's hands could mean greater danger. Still, he wouldn't back down. His body was tense, his hair bristling, as if every fiber was ready to act again. And this is where a powerful reflection arises. To what extent do we manage to remain calm in the face of something so overwhelming? Mentality in this kind of situation is everything. The hidden truth is that there is no rehearsal possible for moments like this. They just happen, and our reactions reveal who we really are. The father, for example, felt torn between two impossible decisions: to face the man and risk the life of the family, or to obey and give up one of the children, carrying forever the weight of a choice that has no return. It is in this dilemma that we realize the brutal impact of extreme situations. They force us to decide in seconds what can determine an entire life. The tension seemed unbearable. The world was reduced to that small space. The car, the gun, the screams, the restrained cry, the dog ready to strike again. It was as if there was nothing else but that scene. The suspended time, the heavy breathing, the beating hearts out of step. All it took was one false gesture, one hasty move, and it could all end in tragedy. Now I want to go even deeper into this issue, because it's not just about the threat itself, but what it represents. Such situations expose human frailty in a brutal way. They reveal our hidden truths, what we try to hide even from ourselves, the fear of losing, the inability to control, the helplessness in the face of the unpredictable. But at the same time, they can also reveal strength, courage, the ability to resist even when all seems lost. This duality between fear and courage, despair and hope, is what makes these stories so impactful. Think about what is going on inside the mother's mind at that moment. She didn't have guns, she didn't have enough strength to stand up to an armed adult man, but she had something no kidnapper could steal: the determination to protect her children at any cost. This internal, silent decision was already an act of resistance. Courage often is not noisy. It is born in the silence of the heart, when you decide that you will not give in, even if everything around says otherwise. The dog, in turn, became the physical reflection of this courage. While the family tried to resist on the emotional plane, he was ready to act on the physical plane. This sum of invisible forces creates something that changes the course of events. Because in the end, courage is that. An energy that infects, that spreads, that creates new possibilities, even in the darkest situations. And perhaps that's the biggest impact of scenes like this. They force us to look at our own lives and question how we would react. Would we retreat? Would we fight? Would we find within US forces that we didn't even know existed? This reflection is not just curiosity. It is essential to understand how much we are shaped by moments of crisis. It is behind the scenes of life, in situations that no one plans, that we discover the size of our true strength. The scene was fraught with tension. The man screamed. The gun trembled in his hand. The children cringed, the father tried to reason, and the dog remained motionless, but ready to attack at the slightest sign. It was as if everyone was suspended on an invisible thread, on the verge of an outcome that could change everything. And it is precisely this feeling of uncertainty that touches us the most. Because deep down we know life is unpredictable. We can plan, organize, try to control, but all it takes is an instant for everything to change. And in those moments, it is not planning that saves us, but the courage to act. It's the instinct, the loyalty, the determination not to give up. And since you have come this far with me, I want to propose something simple. Right there in the comments. I'm on this journey too. So I know you're feeling that tension, reflecting along with me, and really diving into this story that still has a lot to reveal. Heavy breathing filled the car, as if the air had turned into something thick, impossible to pull out effortlessly. The air seemed rarefied, dense, as if the environment was compressed by an invisible force. The mother, with her arms around her children, trembled in a way that she tried to disguise, but that the children clearly perceived. The smallest of them, clinging to her waist, hid his face and sobbed low, not having the courage to cry out loud, as if afraid that his crying would attract the attention of the offender even more. The girl, a few years older, remained paralyzed, her eyes fixed on the silhouette of the man outside, her gaze glazed and moist without blinking. It was the look of one who, for the first time, discovered the true meaning of fear. Outside, his father remained a few steps away, a mixture of paralysis and guilt eating away at him from the inside. He always believed that he could protect his family, that his firm presence was enough for nothing serious to happen. But now, before the gun gleaming in the afternoon light, he felt small, almost useless. Every fiber of his body screamed to react, but his brain knew any misstep could turn terror into tragedy. The dog, motionless for a few seconds, kept his gaze fixed on the armed aggressor, growling low in a low and constant sound which broke the suffocating silence like a veiled threat. The tension in the air was so dense that it seemed to be possible to touch it. Panic gripped everyone, as if it had a life of its own. He was not just a sensation, but a cruel visitor, infiltrated in every space, in every gesture. The car, which until minutes before had represented a refuge, now became a prison, a glass safe in which the family was cornered. With each knock of the man against the window, the dry sound reverberated like hammering against hope. The youngest buried his face even more in his mother's lap. The little girl let the tears fall in silence, and the mother, without the strength to react, shook her head as if begging in thought that all this was just a nightmare. The kidnapper, increasingly impatient, slammed his gun against the glass and with each impact seemed more aggressive. He shouted, demanded, threatened. Her voice mingled with the muffled cries of the children, creating a soundtrack of pure despair. Time, in that fraction of life, did not run forward. He crawled, slow, cruel, as if mocking the impotence of the family. It was as if the universe had decided to extend the suffering, forcing each one to taste the pain at its maximum intensity. And it is precisely here that human frailty is revealed in its crudest form. No matter the preparation, no matter the plans, when life decides to turn upside down, everything we know seems insufficient. The mother, who had so often promised her children that she would always protect them, now found herself with no way out, no choice, no power. The father, who grew up believing that his presence would be enough to ensure safety, felt overwhelmed by reality. He was not an unbreakable shield, not in front of a gun. It is in these scenes of despair that the hidden truths emerge. No one is really ready to face the unexpected. The psychological weight of this moment is something almost impossible to translate into words. Imagine the heart beating so fast that it seems about to tear the chest. Imagine the mind divided into 1,000 contradictory orders: run, scream, fight, give in, without being able to choose a single answer. Panic is treacherous. It steals clarity, distorts perception, turns seconds into eternities. It rips the ground and leaves us adrift in a dark void. For that family, it was no longer just a robbery. It wasn't an attempted kidnapping. It was the plunge into a real nightmare, in which every detail seemed to inevitably lead to a dark end. The father felt a lump in his throat, his muscles stiff, his mouth dry. His eyes went from the attacker's gun to the children inside the car, as if torn between two equally cruel realities. He wanted to be a wall, he wanted to be a shield, but he knew that in the face of a shot, his resistance would be nothing more than an instant more of pain. This dilemma consumed him from the inside, corroded his soul. The mother, in a state of silent shock, did not scream, did not react, but only cried quietly, squeezing her children against herself, as if she could protect them with the force of a hug. Love was the only weapon available. And it is in this emotional abyss that one of the greatest revelations about the human condition arises. The brutal awareness that we do not control as much as we believe. We spend our lives planning, organizing, trying to believe that we are masters of destiny, but in seconds life can reveal the hidden truth that we are fragile in the face of the unpredictable. This perception is cruel, but also transformative, because while it exposes our vulnerability, it also sparks resistance. It is in chaos that we often find the courage to continue, even when everything points to the contrary. The dog stood motionless, growling, each muscle vibrating like a spring about to be released. His eyes did not tear away from the aggressor, and his posture conveyed an almost human determination. Perhaps it was precisely this silent presence, this unwavering loyalty, that prevented the family from surrendering once and for all to despair. Even amid the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope. They weren't totally helpless. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. Because panic, although it seems absolute, also carries in itself a powerful paradox. It paralyzes, but it can also be the trigger for an internal transformation. It is at the instant when we feel that there is no way out that the mind, by instinct, ignites a spark of resistance. It is as if, behind the darkest scenes of the soul, there is an invisible thread that insists on keeping us on our feet. This duality, fragility and strength, despair and courage, is what makes the human experience so complex. The family's despair was real, but it was also combustible. Every tear, every quickening heartbeat, every second of utter fear prepared, without their realizing it, the ground for a reaction. Because the human being, when cornered, can discover forces that he never imagined possessing. The emotional journey they were living in that instant was a painful revelation, but also a profound reminder. It is not the end that defines the story, but the decisions that arise in the midst of chaos. Tragedy seemed inevitable. Everything pointed to a bleak outcome, but life, as always, loves to challenge certainties. Sometimes the unexpected manifests itself when we least expect it, breaking the script that seemed already written. And that family was about to experience just that. And to let me know that you are living this journey together with me, comment there. This makes sense to me. The tension-laden silence was broken only by the sound of the muffled crying of children and the insistent knocking of the man against the glass. Each impact made the car shudder, as if the metal frame was about to give way. The father, motionless, felt like someone about to be swallowed by a tidal wave of despair. His heart was beating so hard that he could hear the blood pulsing in his ears. The mother tried to stand her ground, but her body no longer obeyed. The muscles trembled, the watery eyes betrayed fear, and the arms that wrapped around the children were her last resort of protection. The assailant, with his finger firmly on the trigger, seemed increasingly impatient, as if about to explode into violence. It was the synthesis of chaos, the moment when everything seemed about to collapse, and it was at that moment, at the height of the tension, that the unexpected happened. Until that moment, the family dog remained in a state of alert, growling low, watching every movement with eyes that betrayed tension and restrained fury. But when he realized that the threat was imminent and that the lives of those he considered his pack were at risk, he didn't hesitate. His muscles contracted like a spring about to release, and in a split second, he shot towards the gunman. The sound of paws against the ground echoed like thunder, breaking the heavy silence of the street, announcing that the course of the scene would change radically. The aggressor, surprised by the onslaught, tried to react, but there was no time. The dog jumped violently and dug its teeth into his arm. The scream that followed broke the stifling silence with an almost liberating intensity. The weapon, once steady, swung dangerously and almost escaped the man's hands. The feeling of absolute control, which until then seemed unshakable, fell apart in seconds. The father, astonished, watched the scene without believing what he saw. What until a moment before seemed like an inevitable tragedy turned into a whirlwind of possibilities. Inside the car, the mother pressed her children to her chest, and the mere fact of hearing that cry of pain brought her a thread of hope. The youngest, still with tears streaming down his face, raised his eyes as if trying to understand what had happened. The girl, though still in shock, felt something change in her heart. For the first time in many minutes, hope seemed possible. It was as if in that jump, the dog had become not just a protector, but the very symbol of the chance to survive. And here lives a powerful revelation. Courage does not ask for permission, does not warn that it will come. It simply manifests itself, breaks through fear and imposes itself. The dog did not assess risks, did not make calculations about consequences, did not measure probabilities. He just acted, moved by an absolute loyalty, by an invisible connection that goes far beyond human understanding. This instinctive gesture carries with it a profound lesson about mindset and decisions. Often, at the height of danger, what changes the course of history is not cold logic but the raw force of action. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the entrance of the dog at this moment is not just an exciting scene, it is also a metaphor for transformation. Until that moment, the family was paralyzed, overwhelmed by panic, imprisoned by powerlessness. But when the dog decided to act, he broke the invisible chains that bound them. It created a breach, a fissure in the narrative that seemed closed. The impact of his attitude was not limited to the wounded aggressor. He spread through the air, infected those present, opened a space of resistance in the midst of chaos. The aggressor, who believed he had absolute control of the situation, was surprised by a force he had never considered. The father, who until seconds before felt overwhelmed by impotence, saw a new chance to act. The mother, who had already surrendered to despair, breathed a breath of relief. Even the children, steeped in fear, felt that there was something bigger going on. A glimmer of hope cut through the darkness. That is the strength of a decision, even when it is born of instinct. A single attitude can turn the tide of an entire journey, plucking people from the abyss into which they were about to fall. This scene invites us to reflect on something bigger. How many times in our own lives do we feel exactly like that family? Cornered with no way out, trapped inside an invisible car surrounded by threats that seem impossible to overcome. In these hours, panic paralyzes. Despair steals clarity and everything in us screams that there is no solution. But sometimes all it takes is an unexpected gesture, a force that comes suddenly to remind you that the script is never completely written. The entry of the dog is not only about animal courage. It's a reminder that the extraordinary can come when we least expect it, and it can change everything. The impact was so profound that even the perception of time was altered. Seconds before, every moment was dragging, heavy, cruel, as if mocking the suffering of the family. Now every split second became electrifying, charged with intensity. The scream of the aggressor, the growl of the dog, the wide eyes of the father, the cry that gradually ceased. All these elements made up a chaotic symphony that announced a possibility. Perhaps tragedy was not inevitable. Maybe there was a way out. And we cannot ignore the symbolic value of that moment. The dog did not enter only as a physical defender. He was the catalyst for the transformation. He showed viscerally that courage can manifest behind the scenes of life without warning, without planning, breaking the oppressive silence. This is the kind of revelation that makes this story so much bigger than a simple account of violence and resistance. It's a narrative about impact, about mindset, about decisions that reveal hidden truths in the darkest moment. As the attacker tried to break free, fighting the searing pain in his arm, his confidence drained away. Fear, until then a burden of the family, began to change sides. The weapon, once so firm and menacing, trembled in his hand. The family, though still in shock, was no longer in utter despair. For the first time there was room to believe. And that space, however small, was all they needed at that moment. And that's exactly what makes this scene so impactful. The reminder that even when all seems lost, the unexpected can change everything. A gesture of courage, an instinctive decision, a leap of faith. Sometimes that's what it takes to turn the page on a fate that seemed unchanging. The extraordinary does not follow logic. It just happens. And to let me know that you are living this journey together with me, comment there. I'm on this journey too. The barking broke the silence like an explosion. It was not an ordinary sound. It was a roar from the bowels, charged with fury and instinct. The dog advanced with an almost unbelievable intensity, as if in that single movement it was gathering all the strength of its existence. The paws beat violently against the ground. The bristling hair denounced the fury that took over his body. The eyes, fixed on the target, shone with unshakable determination. And then, in a sure gesture, he dug his teeth into the kidnapper's arm, exactly at the instant when the man was preparing to act. The scream that came out of the attacker's mouth was so sharp that it echoed through the walls of nearby houses. He didn't expect that reaction, much less the searing pain that took him by surprise. The weapon, once firm, now trembled in his hand. His fingers lost strength, and the metallic object narrowly escaped his control. The scene, which seconds before had been under the absolute domination of violence, was transformed before everyone's eyes. The kidnapper, who had seemed invincible, now writhed in despair. The father, astonished, saw before him an opportunity that had not existed before. His mind, once dominated by panic, was now filled with quick, strategic thoughts. It was as if the attack of the dog had unlocked in him a new mentality. The mother, still in the car, could not believe what she saw. His eyes, once dizzy with despair, now shone with an almost painful hope. The children, in tears, watched the scene as if awakening from a nightmare. The unlikely hero had appeared, and he had 4 legs. The growl of the dog mixed with the screams of the aggressor, creating a chaotic soundtrack that widened the contrast between courage and fear. The criminal, who until seconds ago dictated the rules of the scene, was now at a complete disadvantage. With every movement of the dog, the control oozed out of his hands like sand. It was as if the hidden truth of the whole situation had been revealed. Brute force was not on the side of the one who wielded the weapon, but on the side of the one who acted out of love and instinct. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what was happening there was not just a physical attack. It was the manifestation of something much greater, the instinct of protection. This instinct, which cannot be taught in manuals or conditioned by rules, is born from the purest essence of loyalty. The dog did not think about himself, did not measure consequences. He only reacted because he understood in his own way that his family's life was in danger. This decision, albeit instinctive, completely transformed the course of history. And when we think about it, we realize that the protective instinct is not unique to animals. It also exists in us, although it is often hidden under layers of rationality, fear, or hesitation. How many times have we gone through life avoiding risk, avoiding confrontation, choosing silence when we should act? But in the face of an extreme moment, this dormant instinct can awaken. It is as if there is within us a reserve of courage ready to emerge from behind the scenes of chaos. The kidnapper now was no longer the same man who entered the scene full of confidence. His body was bent, the expression was one of pain and despair, and the weapon no longer seemed like an extension of his power. The dog did not let go of his arm, firm, as if he knew that any loosening could mean danger again. The mother, still clinging to her children, cried with relief and fear at the same time. The father, overcome by adrenaline, was preparing to act, because he understood that this was the breakthrough that could change everything. This moment shows us something essential. When life puts us against the wall, it is not the perfection of the plans that saves us, but the ability to act on improvisation, driven by a force greater than fear. And this is a point of transformation. What seemed inevitable, what seemed already written, can be rewritten in seconds as long as there is the courage to break the cycle. The psychological impact of this attack is profound, not only for the family, who now saw a possibility being born, but also for the aggressor, who painfully discovered that he was not in control. And this role reversal is powerful. It shows that life can be turned upside down in moments, revealing that no one, no matter how prepared they are, is invulnerable in the face of the unexpected. The journey of the family was transformed there, but also that of the criminal, who faced his own vulnerability in a brutal way. And the most fascinating thing is to think about how stories like this affect us, even from a distance. By listening, by imagining, by feeling every detail, we are invited to reflect on our own choices. Would we be able to act in the face of such a huge threat? Would we, in moments of crisis, have the same courage to throw ourselves, to protect, to resist? These questions echo because they touch on something universal: the search for meaning, the struggle for life, the revelation of hidden forces that only appear in the darkest moments. The family, though still steeped in fear, was no longer paralyzed. Something had changed in the atmosphere. The crying of the children gave way to a tense silence. The mother breathed between sobs. The father rose with the posture of one who, even in the face of danger, felt that there was still something to be done. It was as if everyone was being transformed by the same impact that had turned the script of the scene. And this transformation does not go away. Even after everything ends, it remains. It settles in the heart, shapes the mindset, redefines future decisions. Because when we witness pure courage, whether in ourselves or in those next to us, we are never the same again. It is as if the world reveals to us an invisible frame, a truth that has always been there, but that only shows itself in the face of chaos. The weapon trembled in the hands of the attacker. His breathing was out of whack and blood flowed down his bitten arm. He no longer had the same dominant stance. With each passing second, fear grew in him. Control slipped from him, and the narrative of the scene was about to change for good. And to let me know that you are walking this journey together with me, comment there. This makes sense to me. The aggressor's cry of pain echoed down the street, mixed with the fierce growl of the dog that did not retreat even for an instant. The man tried to free himself with desperate movements, but the bite was firm, relentless, as if the animal had found in that arm the key to unbalancing the whole scene. The sound of teeth digging into flesh was brutal, reminding everyone that this was not a gesture of gratuitous attack, but of pure defense, an act of protection driven by instinct and loyalty. The criminal writhed, his screams alternated between pain and anger, but each attempt to get rid of him seemed only to intensify the dog's determination. Confusion spread like fire on dry straw. The noise of screams and furious barking was so intense that it seemed to resonate on every wall, in every window around. The scene of that quiet little street had turned into a makeshift battlefield. The mother, still inside the car, clutched her children with almost superhuman strength, trying to create a protective bubble amid the chaos. The children's cries mingled with the deafening noise, but even there, between sobs, a spark of hope began to be born. The father, overcome by adrenaline, was no longer the man paralyzed by fear. His eyes were alert, his muscles ready to act. It was as if the dog's attitude had awakened within him, a courage that had been dormant. The scene was chaotic, but within the chaos was a revelation. The balance of power was shifting. The gunman, who until seconds ago had mastered every detail, was now vulnerable, humiliated in the face of an unexpected force. His movements were jerky, his breathing short and out of whack, and the weapon trembled in his hand. Control, which seemed absolute, slowly trickled from his fingers. It was like watching a staggering giant, threatened not by another giant, but by a pure, instinctual force that knew no bounds. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we see in this instant is not just a physical struggle, but the naked exposure of a conflict between power and truth. The aggressor represented intimidation, domination by fear, the illusion of force guaranteed by the weapon. The dog represented the instinct of protection, courage that does not calculate risks, loyalty that does not need explanations. It is in this shock that a powerful lesson emerges. What often seems fragile can be exactly the force that knocks down what seemed unshakable. Time, which had hitherto dragged on like cruel punishment, now became opportunity. Every second was a gift, every fraction was a chance to escape. The father's mind worked at full speed. He knew that moment could not be wasted. The mother, between sobs, began to realize that maybe there was a way. And even the children, plunged into fear, felt the difference in the atmosphere. The terror was still there, but something had changed. Hope crept into the air like a whisper that it might be possible to survive. The dog would not let go of the man's arm, and his furious barking sounded like declarations of war, like promises that he would not retreat. It was a visceral scene that reflected a hidden truth. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. How often do we let fear guide our decisions? How often do we recoil in the face of risk, even when we know deep down that there is a force within us capable of resisting? The dog showed us, in a crude and direct way, what we so often forget. Fear may even be present, but it does not have to dictate the outcome. Confusion was at its height. The aggressor, his face twitching with pain, desperately tried to let go, but every movement only made the scene more unfavorable for him. The metallic sound of the gun slamming against the bodywork of the car was a cruel reminder that the danger was not over yet, but it also gave away his weakness. The absolute power of before now seemed to slip like sand between the fingers. The father, who until minutes before had only watched, stepped forward. His eyes steady reflected the decision not to waste the gap created by the dog. The mother, even in tears, whispered words of courage to her children, words broken by emotion, but which echoed as an invitation to resist. This decisive confrontation was not only physical. He had emotional, psychological, and even spiritual layers. It was a clash between despair and courage, between dominance and freedom, between gun violence and instinctive loyalty. It was the kind of moment that redefines not only the present, but the entire future journey. Because when we are faced with situations like this, we not only face the other, we also face our own limitations, our hidden truths, our deepest decisions. The aggressor now no longer had the same dominance. His body trembled, his breathing was irregular. His eyes reflected something that had not existed before: fear. The dog, firm, did not loosen its bite. It was as if he knew that this was the crucial moment, and that retreating would mean surrendering everything back to the enemy. The family, in shock, began to realize that the inevitable tragedy could turn into a real chance of survival. And this is where the most fascinating point of this scene lies: the transformation, not only from the aggressor, who ceased to be seen as an invincible figure, not just the family, who were beginning to feel hope sprouting amid the terror, but also ours that we follow this story and realize that the extraordinary manifests itself in the most unlikely moments. What seemed to be only despair becomes revelation. What seemed like an end turned into an opportunity. This is the kind of moment that marks forever. It redefines trajectories, it reconfigures mindset, it leaves invisible scars that shape the way we see the world from then on, not just for the family who lived through the scene, but for anyone who witnessed or heard about it, because it brings out a profound teaching. Courage is not theory, it is practice. It's not a concept, it's an action. And the extraordinary happens when hesitation gives way to decision. The noise of screams, barking, and confusion still filled the air, but now, behind all this chaos, there was a silent certainty. The family was no longer alone in fear. They had at their side an ally who would not back down no matter the risk. That presence was enough to rekindle the flame of resistance and pave the way for the next decision. And to let me know that you are following every detail of this journey with me, comment there. This makes sense to me. The criminal was still writhing, uselessly trying to free himself from the fierce bite of the dog, when an internal snap happened in the father's mind. It was as if in that instant he had woken from a nightmare and seen a hidden truth that until then had been shrouded in fear. The aggressor was not invincible, the terror was not absolute, and there was a loophole to escape. With a quick movement, taking advantage of the distraction, he opened the car door and signaled to his wife and children. The heart beat so hard that it seemed to want to jump out of the chest, but inside it there was no longer only fear, there was also decision. And decision is the fine line that separates defeat from transformation. The mother, even with trembling hands and dizzy eyes, immediately understood the signal. She grabbed the children with the strength of those who do not accept losing, and between sobs and courage, pulled them out of the car. The noise of crying mingled with the din of confusion, but now the sound carried another energy. It was not just despair, it was also the urgency of escape, the real possibility of survival. Each step was heavy, but at the same time liberating, as if tearing off the invisible chains of panic. The aggressor screamed, trying to intimidate, but the pain overpowered him. His voice no longer sounded like that of a predator, but like that of someone in despair. The dog firm would not let go. The father, realizing the advantage, stood up with a posture that until seconds ago seemed impossible to him. He was no longer the cowed man, but someone willing to fight for his own life and the lives of those he loved. The simple act of getting out of the car turned into a silent declaration. We will no longer be hostages of fear. And it was at that moment that the street began to transform. Doors and windows that were closed opened. Neighbors previously hidden by inertia and fear began to emerge. First curious glances, then cries of warning, until a few voices joined in a chorus. "Call the police!" The news spread from house to house like a fuse of gunpowder. That family that seemed alone now became the center of a collective movement. And here's a powerful revelation. When courage manifests, it rubs off. A gesture can awaken an entire community. It can turn spectators into allies. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what is before us is not just the scene of a family desperately running down the street. It is living proof that courage has expansive impact. It is not limited to those who practice it. It spreads, breaks boundaries, creates invisible waves that touch others. That dog, by acting, not only saved the family, he aroused neighbors, mobilized people, kindled in the collective a sense of responsibility, and it makes us reflect on our own journey. How often do we wait for someone to save us, not realizing that a single attitude of ours can inspire dozens of others to rise up too? As the father pulled his wife and children towards the street, the mother's heart seemed to beat in sync with that of the little ones. The children, still frightened, ran, not knowing where exactly, but trusted. The crying still ran down their faces, but now the sound was different. There was a mixture of fear, yes, but also of energy, of movement. They were no longer trapped, no longer paralyzed victims. They were part of an unlikely escape that was turning into victory. The dog, even at the height of the confrontation, seemed to understand that his mission was not just to attack, but to create space for his family to escape. Each bark was like an invisible wall that kept the aggressor at bay. Every second he resisted was a precious gift, a fragment of time that opened up to freedom, and Dad knew that. Therefore, while running with his family, he looked back, with eyes dizzy with gratitude. They weren't just tears of fear, they were tears of recognition for the loyalty that was writing a new chance for them all. Confusion in the street was growing. People shouted, called the police, some tried to approach to help. The criminal, desperate, no longer had control of the situation. The psychological weight of defeat was beginning to overwhelm him. The weapon, once a symbol of power, was now just a powerless object swaying in trembling hands. He was no longer the man who dominated the scene. He was the man who fought in vain against a dog that would not surrender. And this turn of the situation carries a message that goes beyond the scene itself. Because in real life, in our personal battles, how many times do we feel like hostages, believing that there is no way out? How often does the pressure of fear of circumstances, of invisible threats, trap us inside a locked car surrounded by dangers? And yet, when an unexpected gesture happens, everything changes. It is as if life reminds us that there is always a way. It may be narrow, it may be risky, but it exists, and it's up to us to decide if we're going to move. The father, panting, reached the gate of a nearby house. Neighbors made room, extending their arms in support. The mother entered with the children, protecting them behind the makeshift barrier of people who now united against the threat. The street was no longer the scene of fear, but the scene of a mobilization. Cries for justice echoed. Phones in hand reported to the police every detail. The criminal, no matter how hard he fought, was already lost. He had lost control, lost dominion, lost the terror he had once imposed. And here's the crux: it wasn't just physical strength that reversed the situation. It was the combination of instinct, courage, and decision. It was the ability of an animal to act without hesitation, of a father to perceive the breach, of a mother to protect, of children to trust, and of neighbors to awaken. This sum is what creates true transformation, the revelation that no one is totally alone when courage comes into play. The dog still growled, firmly, as if to say, "I have done my part, and I will not let go until I am sure you are safe." This protective instinct is what gives strength to the story. He was not there for calculated heroism, but for love. And that is exactly what changes everything. The loyalty that does not require reward, the decision that is born from within, the courage that does not need recognition. The sound of sirens in the distance began to approach. The sound which for many would mean only routine, for that family was the announcement of hope. The police came, and with it, confirmation that the turnaround was complete. The criminal, until then a figure of menace, was now only a cowed man, surrounded by the cry of justice and the strength of courage that he never expected to face. And to let me know that you are living every detail of this journey with me, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." Sirens echoed in the distance as a promise of justice finally drew near. The sound, cutting through the street air, brought an immediate relief that ran down the spine of mother, father, and even children, as if each beat of that siren carried confirmation that the terror was coming to an end. The aggressor, already tired, weakened by the bite that did not give in, looked around and noticed that his authority evaporated at the same rate as the hope of escape was shattered. Red and blue lights reflected off the walls of the houses, painting the scene as an almost cinematic spectacle, but one that was actually one of the rawest real-life experiences. The confrontation between fear and protection, violence and courage, despair and transformation. The police officers got out of the car in quick movements, trained, but could not hide their surprise at what they saw. An armed criminal cowering with his arm caught in the teeth of a dog that seemed willing to fight until the last breath. The command was firm. "Drop the gun, now." The voice echoed loudly, charged with authority, and the attacker's response was a cry of pain mixed with hesitation. The gun fell on the asphalt with a dry metallic sound, which resonated like a full stop in a long, painful phrase. At that moment, the dog still did not retreat. He kept his bite, his gaze fixed, his whole body vibrating in alertness. It was as if he knew that the threat would only end when there was no doubt left that his family was safe. The father, with tears in his eyes, tried to approach, and in a trembling voice called the name of the dog. The animal, little by little, let go of the bloody arm of the criminal, but remained at the head of the family, growling low like a guardian who does not let down his guard even when the battle seems won. Handcuffed, the attacker was led to the car, while the crowd of neighbors watched in silence. Some murmured words of revolt, others of relief, but all shared the same thought. That outcome could have been very different if it had not been for the intervention of the dog. The police fulfilled their role, but it was impossible to ignore that the real hero was already there before the sirens, before the official weapons, before any reinforcement. The real turning point had been written by a pure instinct of protection. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because the prison scene does not only contain the narrative of a criminal being taken away, it reveals the importance of invisible forces that we often underestimate. The dog had no military training, did not carry weapons, did not know police tactics. And yet it was he who broke the sequence of tragedy. It was he who disarmed the power of fear and created space for life to continue. That's the revelation. Salvation doesn't always come from what is formal, structured, or authorized. It often comes from behind the scenes, from what is born of loyalty, connection, and instinctual courage. The father, still panting, hugged his wife and children tightly, as if he wanted to compensate in a single gesture for all the dread they had experienced. His eyes, dizzy, sought the dog next to him, and in silence he understood. The debt he would carry with that animal could not be paid in words. The mother, in tears, caressed her children, who were still shaking, trying to convey security with her presence, even knowing that she was also destroyed inside. Her touch on the children's hair was more than affection. It was a gesture of reconstruction, a first step to return to them the feeling of protection that had been torn away minutes before. And all around, the neighborhood watched not just the fall of a criminal, but the rise of a story that would become a symbol. Each look reflected the realization that they were witnessing something rare, a moment when animal courage and human frailty met to generate a collective transformation. It was impossible not to be moved, impossible not to realize the impact of it all. This scene exposes a hidden truth. We often believe that the solution to our problems will come from outside, from someone with more power, from a larger structure, from a reinforcement that has not yet arrived. But the turning point happens when we understand that within us, or next to us in the bonds we cultivate, there is already the necessary strength to resist and change the course of the journey. The dog did not wait for the police. He didn't wait for his father to react. He just did. And that simple gesture, but brutal in its intensity, was what made that ending possible. The officers, seeing the animal still in a defensive position, exchanged complicit glances. There was no doubt. Without that dog, the scene would be narrated in a tragic, perhaps irreversible way. They recorded the facts, gave orders, followed protocols, but deep down they knew the true story was there before their eyes in the invisible bond between a family and its protector. And this is where thinking about mindset comes in. How many times do we as human beings wait for the official savior, the perfect moment, the outside help, the miracle solution, when in fact we already have a chance to act? How many times do we postpone the decision because we believe that we do not yet have the right tools, when in reality what we need is only the courage to take the first step? This story is not about a dog against a criminal. It's about decision versus hesitation, about action versus passivity, about the transformation that happens when someone chooses not to wait any longer. The car left, taking the criminal in handcuffs, and the street was filled with a heavy but different silence. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of catharsis, the deep breath after the storm. The kids looked at the dog like they look at a superhero, and in a way that's exactly what he had become. The father stroked his head with a slow, almost solemn gesture, and the animal finally relaxed, as if understanding that its mission had been accomplished. But there is an important detail. This was not just the conclusion of a conflict. It was the beginning of a transformation in the mentality of that family. They would never look at life the same way again. The fear that paralyzed them gave way to the certainty that there is always a way out. The insecurity that imprisoned them was replaced by the understanding that even in the most extreme situations, there is a space for reaction. And this is a revelation that is not limited to them. It is something that touches all of us. Now that the criminal was in custody, the question was not only what would have happened if the dog had not acted, but also, how many times in life do we let our own invisible aggressors hold us hostage? It may not be an armed kidnapper, but it may be fear of failure, insecurity about the future, the pressures that surround us and make us believe that we have no way out. And yet, there is always the possibility to act, to bite fear with the same force as that dog, to break the cycle and make room for hope. This isn't just a rescue story, it's a powerful metaphor about choices, because ultimately, it all comes down to this: decisions. The dog decided to act, Dad decided to run, Mom decided to protect, the neighbors decided to unite, and the police decided to conclude. Each decision added together built the turnaround. That is the strength of a journey. It is never made of a single step, but of a succession of choices that together write a different destiny. And to let me know that you also see the impact of this turn with me, comment there. This makes sense to me. The news did not take long to spread. What began as a tragedy foretold turned into a story of resistance, courage, and transformation that soon gained a voice beyond the borders of that street. The next morning, neighbors commented on every corner, describing in detail the moment the dog jumped at the attacker. Some still trembled at the memory of the confusion. Others narrated how they had rushed to help the family, but all came to the same conclusion. That animal was not just a pet dog. It was a guardian who had put himself between life and death to save those he loved. Local newspapers were the first to publish the news. Headlines emblazoned strong words like "four-legged hero" and "dog prevents tragedy in attempted kidnapping." The photos of the family hugging the dog, still with wet looks and marks of trauma, circulated through the pages and mobile phone screens. Within hours, the story began to be shared on social networks, reaching thousands of people who were moved by the scene. The comments multiplied. People thanking that family for being alive, people remembering their own animals and the loyalty they had already shown in critical moments. The dog, until then only known to the neighbors, became a symbol. People who had never crossed his path now recognized him as a true hero, able to inspire hearts and change minds. Children asked to see it. Neighbors brought snacks as a form of gratitude, and even people from other cities wrote messages saying that the story had touched their lives. It was as if that gesture of courage had transcended the barrier of the moment and become a collective revelation. The reminder that even in the darkest situations, there is a light that can guide us. The father, still shaken, spoke with humility in the interviews, always stressing that without the dog they would not be there. He said this not as a catchphrase, but as a confession loaded with truth. The mother, between tears and smiles, repeated that she would never forget the image of the dog's jump at the moment when everything seemed lost. And the children, although still processing the trauma, smiled when they stroked the furry hero, as if in him they found living proof that safety could be regained. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because community recognition is not just a celebration, it's also a metaphor for how the impact of our choices reverberates beyond the immediate moment. The dog did not act seeking fame, nor did he think about how he would be seen later. He simply reacted, moved by loyalty and instinct. But her decision unleashed a wave that crossed borders, reached strangers, and transformed the perception of everyone who heard her story. This is the strength of decisions. Even those that seem small or instinctive can generate immeasurable repercussions, touching lives that we did not even imagine reaching. The curious thing is that, in a way, the dog has revealed a hidden truth that we often ignore. It does not have to have titles, status, or recognition to change destinies. Transformation begins the moment we choose to act on what we believe to be right, and the impact of this, as simple as it sounds, can multiply in unexpected ways. How many times do we go through life believing that our individual choices are too small to make a difference? This story dismantles this belief, showing that even an instinctive gesture can become a symbol, inspiration, and legacy. Over time, the community began to see that animal with different eyes. He was no longer just the dog that ran down sidewalks or barked at strangers. He was seen as a guardian, a being who carried within him the courage that many humans fail to manifest in moments of crisis. And this collective recognition was also a form of healing. Because in celebrating the dog, the community was also celebrating the resistance of the family, the victory of life over the threat, the reminder that even in the face of chaos, it is possible to rise again. Social media has given voice to this transformation. Videos were edited with reports from neighbors, images of the dog receiving affection, messages of support coming from people who did not even know the family. With each sharing, the story gained more momentum, as if it were a universal reminder that the extraordinary can emerge from behind the scenes of everyday life. This repercussion did not erase the trauma, but it re-signified it. What could have been remembered only as a night of terror has come to be told as a journey of courage and revelation. And that's another powerful lesson. We have no control over the challenges that arise, but we do have a choice about how they will be remembered. The kidnapping, the fear, the despair, all this could be the definitive mark of that family. But thanks to the dog's attitude, the memory was rewritten. It is not a question of denying the pain, but of allowing the narrative to be marked also by victory, by protection, by the loyalty that was imposed in the midst of chaos. This is the real transformation, when tragedy is not the end point but the trigger for a new meaning. Behind the scenes of this repercussion, the family began to rebuild their routine. There were still nightmares, there were still tears, but there was also gratitude. Every time they looked at the dog, they remembered that they were alive because he acted. And this awareness was not only emotional, it was practical. They began to see life with a different mentality, valuing bonds more, giving importance to what really mattered. Because after facing the abyss and coming back, it is impossible to continue in the same way. The impact of the story also generated revelations about the community itself. People who once lived in isolation, each closed in their routine, now came closer. Neighbors who rarely spoke to each other began to exchange words of care, offer help, share moments. It was as if the dog's gesture had awakened not only the courage of the family, but also collective empathy. This is the invisible force that great events carry. They not only mark individuals, but redesign the way entire groups relate to each other. And when we think about it, we realize that the dog did not just save a family. He helped save a community from apathy, from detachment, from indifference. He brought to light the truth that we are all connected, that the pain of one can turn into learning for many, and that the act of protection can become inspiration beyond the walls of a home. This story has gained traction because it touches on something we all feel, the desire to be protected, to believe that there is genuine loyalty, to be sure that in the midst of chaos, someone will be willing to fight for us. And by recognizing the dog as a hero, people were not only celebrating an animal, but also recognizing the need for that courage in their own journeys. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the recognition of the hero also brings up an uncomfortable question. How often do we ignore the real guardians around us? How often do we overlook the value of those who, in silence, sustain our lives? It can be a friend who supports us, a family member who never gives up, or even an unexpected gesture of kindness. The dog, by being celebrated, reminds us to look behind the scenes, to value those who are already heroes in our history, even without headlines or applause. And that's what makes the journey meaningful, realizing that courage doesn't have to be grandiose to be transformative. Sometimes it is hidden in the details, in the small decisions, in the moments when one chooses to act for the other. The hero in this case is a dog, but the message goes further. We can all be guardians, we can all mark a life with our impact. And to let me know that this message resonated with you too, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." The silence that remained after all the confusion seemed to carry a different weight. It was not just the end of a moment of terror, but the beginning of a new consciousness. Each look directed at the dog carried a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and even a certain amazement, because deep down, no one expected salvation to come from him. Family, neighbors, and even police officers knew they had witnessed something rare. The transformation of fear into hope, of tragedy into victory, all through the loyalty of an animal that decided to fight to the end. This episode forces us to reflect on the nature of courage. Not the courage that appears in speeches or in great acclaimed human deeds, but that which is born of instinct, of the hidden truth that reveals itself when there is no more time to think. The dog did not measure risks, did not hesitate to calculate losses or gains. He simply launched himself because inside him there was a certainty greater than any fear, that of protecting his family. And it is precisely this unconditional surrender that awakens in us an almost inexplicable admiration, because it reveals what is often lacking in our own decisions. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we look at this scene carefully, we realize that heroism is not only in the act itself, but in the impact it generates. The dog not only prevented a tragedy, it redefined the mentality of those people, and consequently of everyone who had contact with this story. It forces us to see that heroes can be by our side every day, in silence, without seeking recognition, just living their loyalty natural. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we look at this scene carefully, we realize that heroism is not only in the act itself, but in the impact it generates. The dog not only prevented a tragedy, it redefined the mentality of those people, and consequently, of everyone who had contact with this story. It forces us to see that heroes can be by our side every day, in silence, without seeking recognition, just living their loyalty naturally. And this is a powerful revelation, Perhaps we are surrounded by more guardians than we realize. The image of the dog, panting, still watchful-eyed even after the threat had been controlled, remains as a symbol. He did not seek applause, did not wait for tributes. His reward was simple, the survival of his family. This purity of purpose leads us to question our own intentions. How often do we act expecting feedback, recognition, veil the image of the dog, panting, still watchful-eyed even after the threat had been controlled, remains as a symbol. He did not seek applause, did not wait for tributes. His reward was simple, the survival of his family. This purity of purpose leads us to question our own intentions. How often do we act expecting feedback, recognition, validation? And how many times have we stopped acting because we weren't sure if it would be worth it? The mentality that this episode presents us with is straightforward. There are times when the real strength lies in deciding, without expecting anything in return, just because it is the right thing to do. Dog loyalty is both a lesson and a mirror. Lessons because it teaches us that true courage is silent, often invisible until the instant it is summoned. Mirror because it confronts us with our own hesitations. How often do we let fear paralyze our journey? How many times do we hide behind dog loyalty is both a lesson and a mirror. Lessons because it teaches us that true courage is silent, often invisible until the instant it is summoned. Mirror because it confronts us with our own hesitations. How often do we let fear paralyze our journey? How many times do we hide behind excuses not to face what threatens what we love most? This scene is an invitation to tear the veil of doubt and understand that the force we need is already in us, waiting to be triggered at the right time. And there is something even deeper in this, the transformation that is born of the bond. The dog did not react only by survival instinct, but by connection. He saw in that family not only providers of food and shelter, but part of himself. It was a relationship built on day-to-day, on simple gestures, on silent trust. And it was exactly this bond that gave rise to courage, because it is so with us too. Our most powerful decisions are rarely born of individualism, but of that which connects us with the other. It is the bonds that make us cross the impossible. Behind the scenes of this reflection, we also realize the importance of presence. Being there at that very moment made all the difference. The dog could not plan, but was present, attentive, willing. This leads us to think about how many opportunities we miss because we are not really present in life, distracted by worries or stuck in the past. Presence is the soil where courage germinates, because those who are awake perceive the danger, but also see the gap to act, and maybe that's why so many people were moved by this story. Because it awakens within us a dormant memory that life is not just about chasing achievements or running away from fears, but about being willing to fight for what matters, even without guarantees. The dog shows us that true victory is not the absence of tragedies, but the ability to turn threats into revelations of strength and loyalty. Now imagine for a moment what it would be like if we all carried that same disposition into our journeys. If in the face of challenges, instead of para-now, imagine for a moment what it would be like if we all carried that same disposition into our journeys. If in the face of challenges, instead of paralyzing, we launched ourselves with the conviction that there is something greater to be protected, transformation would be inevitable, not only in our individual stories, but also in our collective ones, because courage is contagious. Just as neighbors and the community came together to witness the dog's act, so in our lives, when someone chooses to act bravely, it awakens the same in those around them. This is the hidden truth we often forget. We are not alone in the battles. There is always someone who can become a guardian next to us, and at the same time there is always the opportunity to be a guardian for someone. This episode is not just a reminder of an animal heroic act, but a reminder that the essence of heroism is within everyone's reach, in different forms, at unexpected moments. The scene of the dog being celebrated as a hero goes beyond the news or social media. It echoes within every person who has ever felt fear and found somehow a reason to resist. It is the impact that transforms victims into survivors, fear into hope, chaos into victory. And this is not just about an animal, it is about the essence of courage that we all carry, even when we do not believe in it. This reflection invites us to an intimate journey, to look within and recognize our own guardians. our own hidden reserves of Kura. This reflection invites us to an intimate journey, to look within and recognize our own guardians, our own hidden reserves of courage. Perhaps they are behind the scenes waiting for the right moment to emerge. Maybe they just need a trigger, like that instant when the dog jumped at the offender. But the certainty is clear. We all have this flame. And when it is lit, it changes not only our history, but that of everyone around. And to let me know that you walked with me here, leave in the comments, "This makes sense to me." The dog that bit a kidnapper's arm not only saved his family, but also reminded us of the true meaning of the word protection. This phrase echoes as a powerful summary of everything we have experienced so far, but at the same time, it opens space for even deeper reflection. Because protection isn't just about stopping visible evil, it's not just about standing between danger and those we love. Protection is also an act of silent love. It is choosing to be present. It is carrying behind the scenes of life a courage that often only appears when the unlikely happens. If you stop to think, that dog couldn't have predicted anything that was coming. He did not study techniques, did not train strategies, did not plan his action. And yet, when chaos set in, his decision was instantaneous, with no room for hesitation. This shows us that true protection is not born of perfect preparation, but of the mentality of surrender, of the willingness to put the other above oneself. And this is rare. In a world where so many decisions are guided by interest, convenience, or fear, witnessing a gesture of pure courage confronts us with a hidden truth. There is strength in simplicity. There is greatness in those who do not calculate the cost of loving. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the impact of this scene is not limited to the moment. He crosses the boundaries of the backyard, the news, and even his own family. The transformation it causes is cold. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the impact of this scene is not limited to the moment. He crosses the boundaries of the backyard, the news, and even his own family. The transfer it is at this point that we realize the true value of this journey. The dog not only physically protected, but awakened in the human heart the memory that we all carry guardians within us. And this leads us to think about our own choices, our own internal confrontations. How often do we let external intimidation set the course of our lives? How many times have we given up our freedom for fear of opposing, for fear of losing, for believing that we would not be strong enough? The episode of this dog becomes a living metaphor. The weapon can symbolize any threat that paralyzes us, but the firm bite represents the decision not to give in. Behind the scenes of every true transformation, there is a moment when you have to decide. This is the moment when we can't back down. We can't wait for someone to do it for us. That's when we realize that if we don't act, history can end in tragedy. The courage of this dog shows us that it is not about being ready, but about being willing. That is the great revelation. Because preparation may fail, plans may fall apart, but the willingness to throw yourself, to not allow fear to win, that is the flame that must never be extinguished. And maybe that's why this story has spread so fast, because it connects us to something bigger, something that goes beyond a heroic rescue. It touches on the deep meaning of the word protection, not as an insurmountable barrier, but as a daily choice. Protecting can be standing next to someone in silence. It can be listening when no one else is listening. It can be holding the hand of someone who is about to give up. Protecting is much more than confronting criminals. It is being present in moments that call for steadfastness, even if they are small in the eyes of the world. This family's journey was marked by fright, chaos, and ultimately unexpected victory. But the journey that begins within everyone who knows this story is even longer, because she invites us to reflect. Who have I protected? What have I failed to protect out of fear, out of distraction, out of disbelief in my own strength? These questions annoy because they require sincerity, but at the same time illuminate because they reveal paths that were previously hidden. And the most interesting thing is to realize that this episode also exposes a truth that we rarely admit. The hero is not always who we expect. It's not always the strongest, the most trained, the most prepared. Sometimes it is precisely the one we least imagined. And this gives us hope, because it opens up the possibility that in any of us there is a potential for guarded heroism. It is as if this story says, do not underestimate who is next to you, not even yourself. The impossible can come from where you least expect it. The dog that bit a kidnapper's arm not only saved his family, but also became a symbol of something bigger. He became a keeper of memories, of consciences, of mentalities. Their action turned into lasting impact, reminding us that true protection knows no bounds. And in the end, what remains is not only the scene of confrontation, but the certainty that loyalty is a force capable of rewriting destinies. And to let me know that you walked with me to this part of the journey, write there in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." If this story touched you, leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who loves dogs. Let's spread this message of courage and faithfulness together. After all this, I think it becomes clear how stories like this are not just accounts of a moment, but true reminders about courage, loyalty, and transformation. If this content made sense to you, it's worth subscribing to the channel to continue receiving stories that inspire and bring deep reflections like this. And since you have come this far with me, leave a comment with the phrase "I'm with you until the end." It will be amazing to know that we walked together to the last detail of this narrative. Oh, and of course, leave your like too, because it shows that this connection really happened throughout the video. And not to stop here, there is a video on the side that complements this subject in a special way. Click and continue with me there, because the journey is just beginning.